Let's go back in time today to the recent past, 1974. Richard Nixon is president of the United States, and just a couple of years before, he had unilaterally taken the dollar off the gold standard. It was essentially the final straw against the dollar becoming what's now referred to today as fiat currency. Fiat currency actually comes from the Latin verb fio, which you would say, let there be, as in the book of Genesis, God said, let there be light. Fiat currency, essentially, we're saying, let there be currency. Let there be currency conjured out of thin air by central bankers who are, by the way, unelected, appointed by commercial bankers and to have the power to conjure as much currency as they want to out of thin air in their sole discretion, and we just trust them to be good guys. This has been the system for the past 43 years now. And it's been heavily abused, as it was in the first couple of years after Nixon took the dollar off of the gold standard. And by 1974, the dollar was crashing. And Nixon did something very interesting, and something that I think is easily one of the biggest and most misunderstood scams in the world, maybe even in the history of the world. And there have been some really massive scams in the history of the world. Nixon did something that was really extraordinary. In 1974, the U.S. was far and away the largest economy in the world. It had been this way for decades. The U.S. was the number one consumer of oil. It was also the number one producer of oil in the world. And up to that point, a lot of because of this, the dollar was primarily the dominant trade currency with respect to oil contracts. Oil, far and away, being one of the most widely traded commodities in the world, and because the U.S. was the largest consumer and the largest producer, most of the oil contracts out there were denominated in dollars. Oil coming from Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or any of these places, they might be denominated in dollars, but there was nothing really preventing the settlement of oil contracts to take place in local currency. So we might say, for example, the price of oil is $10, but in local currency that's 35 rial, and so we'll just settle in rial. And so the Saudis would get paid in rial, and the Kuwaitis would get paid in dinar, and so on and so forth. Well, Nixon did something very interesting because after he took the dollar off the gold standard, the dollar was just a pariah. Nobody wanted it anymore. The dollar was plummeting. Inflation was soaring in the United States because nobody really had any excuse to hold on to the dollar anymore. Why would they? It's not backed by anything other than these false promises by Richard Nixon, who didn't turn out to be the most credible guy in history, right? So he did something very, very interesting. He struck a deal with the Saudis. And of course, Saudi Arabia was one of the largest oil producers in the world, and certainly one of the largest foreign producers of oil outside of the United States. And Nixon struck a deal, and he said, in exchange for weapons, and we know how much governments love weapons, especially those good old American weapons, exchange for weapons and protection, which sounds actually almost a little bit like a mafia deal, I mean, in exchange for protection, we're gonna get something from you. He said he made this deal with the Saudis in exchange for weapons and protection. The Saudis would basically only sell their oil and trade and do their business in U.S. dollars. And the whole idea being very simple is that the Saudis would actually accept U.S. dollars for oil. And then they would take those dollars, now they're sitting on U.S. dollars, and they would hold U.S. dollars as reserves, or they would reinvest U.S. dollars and buy other products and services. Now, if you're holding U.S. dollars, what country would you have to invest in order to invest your U.S. dollars? Duh, the United States, right? So now the Saudis are stockpiling all these dollars, billions and billions and billions of dollars, and where's basically the only place in the world that they can invest that money? In the United States. So the U.S. government, Nixon says, you hold these dollars, you reinvest those dollars, and gee, what do we want you to buy with those dollars? How about U.S. treasuries? So he convinces the Saudis in exchange for weapons and protection, the U.S. will always come to your aid and all this stuff. Okay, so now the Saudis are going and they're buying U.S. treasuries. They're buying debt. It means that the U.S. government is able to go into debt, and that the Saudis are buying that debt and holding on to that debt. And when you think about it, this is really an amazing scam, right? Because this has become commonplace now over the last 4 decades. This has become the standard by which the rest of the world does business. Other countries produce stuff, real stuff, oil. They go out into the ground and they mine for gold and nickel and copper and rare earth metals, and they toil in the fields, and they take all this stuff, real productive stuff. They manufacture goods and they do all these things, and they actually work hard, and they work, the rest of the world works at wages that are far less than what they are in the West. And they work hard and they produce all these different products and services, and they export them, and they accept US dollars. So the rest of the world is doing all of this work. They're pulling the oil out of the ground and the gas and the minerals and so forth, and they're doing all this work. And they export this stuff to the United States, and the US pays them with dollars that they just conjured out of thin air, right? And so they exchange this paper currency that they just conjured out of thin air in exchange for real stuff. It took a central banker 2 seconds to create this currency. I mean, we call it paper currency, but it's not even paper currency anymore. Now it's just, it's just electrons in a database somewhere. As my friend Tim Price calls it, it's an abstraction of what the real concept of money is. So we're talking about, they just conjure these electrons that are representative of paper currency, and they trade those for real products and services that real hardworking people around the world actually had to toil away for days and weeks and months on end, and they just get this paper, right? And now they're sitting with this paper, they're sitting on this stack of dollars, and then what do they do with it? They give it back to the U.S. government. They give it right back to the U.S. government and say, here's your dollars back. And the U.S. government gives them just another kind of paper, right? They give them U.S. treasuries. They give them an IOU that says, oh, okay, well, thanks for those dollars. Thanks for giving us our own money back, so now that we can go and squander it and buy bombs and drones and spy on our citizens and all that good stuff, so we can continue to go $17.6 trillion in debt. Thanks for that. And here, in exchange for that, we're going to give you another piece of paper. And this piece of paper is called a U.S. Treasury bond. And this bond says that in 30 years' time, we're going to pay you back all these dollars in this little itty-bitty, teensy-tiny rate of interest that, by the way, doesn't actually even keep up with inflation. Now, think about what a scam that really is, right? Again, you've got the U.S. that just conjures money out of thin air, trades it to foreigners who actually have to work hard to extract resources and provide value and manufacture products and services. And so now they've given dollars that took no effort or productivity whatsoever to create. And the foreigners now are sitting on these dollars, and they've exchanged goods of actual real value. And then they give those dollars back to the U.S., and the U.S. gives them another kind of paper that says, we'll take those dollars back from you, and we'll give you a few more in 30 years' time. And in 30 years' time, the value of those dollars has eroded so much because they just keep printing more money, and the inflation erodes the value of that purchasing power. So now, this system is basically screwing these foreigners over 2 times. The first time is when they actually give them just this paper that was conjured out of thin air in exchange for real products. That's the first time. And then the second time is when they give them this, this bond. They say, oh, here we'll issue this bond for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, all these different kinds of bonds. And each one of these bonds carries this little tiny bit of interest. And the interest does not keep up with inflation, right? If the rate of inflation, the official numbers in the United States say that the rate of inflation is 2.1%. This is the most recent data coming from the Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics. The CPI says 2.1%. This is the official, notoriously understated rate of inflation. And even if you believe that number to be true, and you say, okay, well, the price of iPads is less than it used to be, and I guess we can always eat iPads, so, forget about the price of food. We'll just believe that number to be true, 2.1%. If you're holding money and you're getting less than 2.1% interest, that means that on an inflation-adjusted basis, you're losing money, right? And this is the case. So many places around the world, they call these negative real interest rates. It means on an inflation-adjusted basis, you're losing money. Think about it like this: if you're, let's say, you have $100, and if you lose 2.1% of your purchasing power, that's essentially what inflation is. Let's say $100 buys you, let's say a loaf of bread is $1. If you have $100, that means that you can buy 100 loaves of bread. But let's say next year the price of a loaf of bread goes up by, I'm just going to use an easy number, I'm going to say 10%. The price of bread goes up 10%. So now the price of bread is now $1.10. Well, if you still have $100, you can no longer buy 100 loaves of bread. Now you can buy, what would that be, about 90 loaves of bread. You can only buy 90 loaves of bread. So you are now 10 loaves of bread poorer than you were a year before. So if you get, for example, 5% interest in your account, now maybe next year you've got $105, but the loaf of bread costs $1.10. So now you've got, somebody help me out with the math, what would it be, 94 loaves of bread that you can afford? So you're still 6 loaves of bread poorer than you were before. So the rate of interest that you get on your, on your bank account, in your investment savings and so forth, has to keep up with the rate of inflation. If it doesn't, then you're losing money. It means you're able to buy fewer loaves of bread than you were the year before. And so this is a way that foreigners who are actually going out and producing all this stuff are getting screwed 2 times by the United States. And it's an unbelievable scam. It's an unbelievable scam. And any rational person has to look at this and say, wait a minute, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Why would any foreigner in his right mind say, hey, that makes perfect sense. Let me get screwed over twice just so that, why? What benefit do they possibly get? So that Americans can consume far more than they produce. They can consume and live this lifestyle that goes way past what they can actually afford. I mean, what benefit is there for a foreigner to continue doing this? There's really very little benefit. And the entire reason that this system exists really actually goes back to this time when back in 1974 when Richard Nixon said, you guys hold dollars, you continue to hold dollars, you invest dollars, and in exchange we'll give you protection and weapons. And this became the global standard. And traditions in many cases die very hard, particularly historical economic traditions. These things can die very, very hard. What this ends up doing is it really maintains the dollar's monopoly, maintains the dollar's monopoly in pricing around the world. And this is when you look at it and you see gold contracts, oil contracts, copper contracts, coffee contracts, all these different contracts that are all denominated in dollars, settled in dollars. This is what makes the U.S. dollar the dominant trade and reserve currency in the world. When a Brazilian merchant does business with a Chinese businessman, they conduct that transaction in U.S. dollars. It means that those dollars have to go through the New York banking system because, of course, that's the primary U.S. dollar settlement center in the world. So if a Chinese merchant is paying a Brazilian producer for some product or service, then they'll credit each other's accounts in the New York banking system. Bank of China and Bank Itaú, they'll both have corresponding accounts in New York. And all that transaction will actually clear and settle through the New York banking system, and it'll happen in U.S. dollars. This has become the standard around the world. And it creates this system where it creates excessive and in many cases even artificial demand for dollars. It means that the rest of the world, if you're in Bhutan, if you're in Bangladesh, if you're in Abu Dhabi, if you're in Australia, and you want to do business with the rest of the world, it means that you're required to hold dollars because everybody else holds dollars. And that's the tradition of the system that dies hard because nobody wants to be you can't be the first person out the door and say, hey, I'm going to start trading in something else, because if nobody else is doing it, then who's going to follow? There's an adoption curve, and the adoption curve can be very steep. Right? You can't be the only person doing it. Currencies is something that, it's just a question of confidence. Everybody else has confidence in the game. Everybody else has confidence in the currency. And so long as everybody else is doing it, everybody else is going to do it. And that's a really hard tradition to unwind. But it's starting to happen in front of our very eyes. In fact, in many cases, if you look at the behavior of the U.S. government, it's as if they're begging the rest of the world to create another system. And this is actually happening very, very quickly. A couple of years ago, this wasn't happening. And now, literally, just over the last 12 to 18 months, we're starting to see more and more and more of an adjustment. And let's talk about what that actually means, because right now, again, the dollar is the predominant trade and settlement and reserve currency in the world. All these countries are holding dollars, and they're taking those dollars and they're reinvesting in U.S. dollar-denominated assets. They're buying treasuries, they're buying ETF, they're buying U.S. real estate, they're buying U.S. stocks, they're buying anything they can in U.S. dollars because they know if they just sit there and do nothing with those dollars, that those dollars are going to be inflated away, and the value is going to be less and less and less as time goes on. And this system is really a cycle, because the more dollars there are in the system, the more popular the dollar is. The more popular the dollar is, the more it reinforces that the dollar is the trade and settlement currency. And so it really, for decades, has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And all this creates this artificial demand for dollars. It means that no matter how much money the Fed just conjures out of thin air, there's always going to be foreigners there who are producing stuff, who are going to accept those dollars and mop up all the excess supply of dollars that are being created. It's an unbelievable scam. No other country in the world could get away with this. If I'm in Chile now, if the Chilean government just started, going and printing trillions and trillions and trillions of pesos, they would have something here called hyperinflation. That's the natural tendency. What happens whenever a country goes and just starts printing crazy amounts of money out of thin air, that's what happens. They get hyperinflation. They get a loss of confidence in the currency. And of course, there have been many instances, particularly here in South America, of hyperinflation in the past, over the past several decades. Throughout the 20th century, there were numerous instances of currency crises, and so forth in this part of the world. This is the stuff that happens. The only reason it doesn't happen in the United States is because, unlike Chile, Chile can't print this currency because there's nobody else in the world that's holding on to Chilean pesos. When a Chinese merchant and a Brazilian manufacturer do business, they're not trading Chilean pesos. There's no external market for Chilean pesos. Nobody's holding Chilean pesos. What are they holding? They're holding dollars. And so long as the world is holding dollars, there's always going to be this demand for dollars. And it means that the Fed can continue printing dollars. It means the U.S. government can continue going into debt because there's almost an unlimited supply of foreigners who are willing to just say, well, okay, I'll take those dollars, because that's the tradition. That's the system. But it's starting to change. It's starting to change, and it's being led by the Chinese and the Russians and the Brazilians. And actually, we talked about this a couple of months ago. I mean, in an unbelievable turn of events, the BRICS, nations that they're called, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and they throw in South Africa, I think, just because they want some African exposure, created an initial framework to something that really challenges this international financial tradition of a dollar-denominated, dollar-dominant global financial system. And in doing so, they created essentially a trade and development bank, something that really rivals the IMF and the World Bank. And they said, this is going to be our thing. We're sick and tired of the IMF. We're sick and tired of the World Bank. We're going to have our own system. And this is the first part of it. What we're also seeing is the Chinese trading in their local currency, in renminbi, with so many other nations right now. There are other nations across the world, from Russia to Argentina. So many countries now are starting to hold renminbi as their foreign reserves. They're starting to trade and settle in renminbi. The Russians are saying, hey, look, we'll sell you natural gas, and we'll take renminbi for it. We won't take dollars anymore. We'll take renminbi, and we're more than happy to do that. Now, you look at this, right, and you see, okay, the U.S. government is going deeper and deeper and deeper into debt practically by the day. They're printing more money than they ever have before. The Federal Reserve balance sheet is at $4.5 trillion. The U.S. government debt, $17.7 trillion. You would think that they would want every single person on the planet excited about holding dollars. But what do? They're practically pushing these guys into bed with each other. Right? They have beat the Russians down. They are freezing their assets, and they're kicking them out of the banking system and so forth. I mean, this is a huge economy. This is a huge exporter. This is an exporter of goods and services that the rest of the world needs. I mean, when you think about it, who is Russia really supplying? They're supplying the Europeans with all their natural gas. It would be nothing for the Russians to just switch over and start taking euros. You would think that the U.S. would be begging the Russians, please continue to take dollars, but they're not. They're chasing them out of the financial system as fast as they possibly can. And they're practically forcing them into bed with the Chinese. And the Russians say, okay, we can't take dollars anymore. Let's take renminbi. What do you think? China sound good? And China say, yeah, no problem. Sounds great. Let's do that. And now you've got two of the largest economies in the world trading with each other in renminbi. Does that set a precedent? Absolutely. Absolutely. It sets a huge precedent. Now all of a sudden other countries go, hey, that looks pretty good. Let's do that too. We're getting sick and tired of the U.S. government. When you think about it, right, the U.S. government has this unbelievable scam, right, where they have so many foreigners out there who are willing to mop up all the dollars and loan them the money back, trading paper for paper for paper and getting these IOUs and getting screwed twice over in the process, just so that the U.S. government can continue to finance their bombs and their drones and their wars and their spying and so forth. And what do they do with that money? They squander it on destructive stuff. You would think they'd be rolling out the red carpet for people. You'd think that Obama would be writing thank you cards to everybody saying, you guys are so great for continuing to mop up our dollars. But they don't. What do? They spy on people. They invade foreign countries. They target somebody that they don't like, and they completely destroy them. They go and they freeze people's assets. Oh, you work for the Russian government. We're freezing all of your assets. They lock entire countries out of the banking system. They pass unbelievably stupid and arrogant legislation like FATCA, which requires every single bank on the planet to enter into an information sharing agreement with the IRS. Who the hell wants to do that? If you're a bank in Ethiopia, do you really want to get in bed with the IRS? No, nobody wants to do that. But the U.S. government is requiring every single person, every single bank in the world to report to them. They are commanding the world to report to them. And they're holding all the strings because they say, if you don't report to us, we're going to lock you out of the U.S. banking system. And so the U.S. is showing the world, they say, we have this power because the dollar is the center of gravity in the global financial system. So we have this power. Are we using this power wisely? No, we're abusing it. We're abusing it for our own benefit at your expense. Now, if you're the rest of the world, right? If you're the United Arab Emirates, if you're Indonesia, if you're Nigeria, and you're looking at this, are you thinking, hey, I can really trust those guys in Washington? No, of course not. Of course not. They're proving to the world that they will abuse every shred of authority they have. That if you do something they don't like, they're going to go after you. This is probably the best example with, was BNP Paribas. BNP Paribas went out and was fined billions and billions of dollars by the U.S. government simply because they did business with a country that the U.S. government doesn't like. Billions and billions of dollars. And this is the way that the U.S. does business around the world. If you do, this was a French bank that did business with a country that the U.S. doesn't like, a non-U.S. country, non-U.S. business, non-U.S. bank, and they were fined almost $9 billion by the U.S. government. And this is unbelievable. And U.S. allies, the French government was up in arms about this and said, this is insane. How can you do this? And yet they did it. And this is something, again, now the U.S. has already driven countries like Russia and Iran and so forth into the arms of the Chinese. Now they're driving the French. And the French finance minister stands up and says, you know what? I think the time has come for the U.S. dollar to finally take a back seat. We can no longer exist in this world where the U.S. dollar is the dominant reserve currency. It's not going to happen overnight, but it needs to happen. It is happening. And it's time. And it really is. He's right. What possible reason is there for the rest of the world to continue financing U.S. arrogance and U.S. largesse and U.S. debt and U.S. consumption for the sole benefit of the United States at the expense of everyone else? It is an unbelievable scam. And frankly, the U.S. government deserves it. They deserve to fall because they have been abusing this authority for decades. They take this power that they've been given, and instead of respecting it and respecting the rest of the world, they've been abusive. And they go and they bully the rest of the world around. You will do what we say. We're going to fine you. We're going to invade you. We're going to spy on you. We're going to drop bombs. We're going to send drones. That's what we're going to do. I mean, nobody likes that. I mean, duh. Nobody likes that. Why would you act that way when the rest of the world is giving you this unbelievable gift? And this is how you treat people. It's just their behavior warrants a massive decline. Unfortunately, this is going to be something that's going to cause substantial turmoil in the United States. The U.S. knows that this is really their Achilles heel. I mean, they have nothing else. I mean, what are they really producing anymore? They're producing dollars. That's the number one export in the United States is dollars. Trillions of dollars. Anything else pales in comparison. And the Commerce Department was saying, oh, we had record exports. Yeah, record exports. Dollars. That's your export. Dollars. U.S. dollars. Everything else pales in comparison to the amount of dollars that get exported, even on a daily basis. And so the rest of the world is starting this de-dollarization. They've had these meetings. They're talking about currency switch, executive orders. They're doing this. Many places around the world they're setting up a new financial system. It's happening. This isn't rumor. This isn't conjecture. This isn't some backroom tinfoil hat wacko stuff. This is mainstream news. It's out there for anybody that wants to pay attention to this. It is out there. It's happening. And the U.S. knows that this is its Achilles heel. And, look, I'm a very data-driven person, so I'm not going to necessarily make a link because the data doesn't necessarily exist, but I will say it is a striking coincidence that all of a sudden Gaddafi in Libya starts saying, hey, I want to start selling oil for gold instead of U.S. dollars. Within a matter of weeks, this guy was gone. His country was invaded, bombs getting dropped. This guy was gone in a matter of weeks. Saddam Hussein, same deal. He got approval from the United Nations to start selling oil for euros. Not dollars, for euros. And suddenly, this guy was gone. Iraq was invaded, this guy was gone. I mean, it's a strange coincidence when you think about it. The U.S. government is in a position where they will protect this is what they call the petrodollar. They will protect their petrodollar interest at all costs. But there's just one problem, and it's a big problem. The problem is right now, they're too broke. They're too broke to actually protect their interests. They're too broke to project military power as they once used to be able to do around the world and bully everybody around. That became painfully obvious, I guess it was last year, when they tried to invade Syria. And Putin said, no, we're not having any of that. We're not going to do that. And if it weren't for Vladimir Putin, of all people, there would have been yet another war in the Middle East led by the United States. They don't have the financial wherewithal anymore. It doesn't matter if the United States Marine Corps can kick anybody's ass on the planet. It doesn't matter if they can't get them from point A to point B. It doesn't matter. They no longer have the financial capability to project military power as they used to be able to do. And this is a major problem for the United States. It's a major problem for the government, but unfortunately it's an even bigger problem for people in the United States. Because when the petrodollar standard begins to unwind and there are new traditions. And again, we're seeing this all over the world. We're seeing increased use of the renminbi. We're seeing Fortune 500 companies that aren't even Chinese. We're seeing companies like McDonald's issuing bonds in renminbi. We're seeing places like major financial centers in London setting themselves up to be major renminbi trading hubs, being the renminbi bond hubs and being the renminbi trading hubs. Switzerland, Canada, France, even in the United States, is one of the largest renminbi trading centers in the world, and it's growing. And the amount of renminbi being settled and traded around the world is growing literally at an exponential rate. It's getting faster and faster and faster. The growth rate is increasing every year. And it's already surpassed the Swiss franc, and it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And it's not going to take that long for it to be a major force in international trade. China's already obviously one of the top economies in the world. A lot of evidence suggests that perhaps even this year, and if not this year, next year, the year after, it doesn't really matter when, China's going to become the number one economy in the world. That has serious power. And obviously, as the number one economy in the world that's producing so much, China is the manufacturer to the world. You got the number one economy in the world with more people than just about everywhere in the world, with the exception of India, and you've got more manufacturing than anywhere else in the world. Doesn't it make sense that they would be able to use their own currency, particularly when everybody else is continuing to adopt the renminbi? We're seeing this all over the place. It's happening. It is happening. And as it continues to happen, suddenly there's less of an incentive for people to hold dollars. And this is the crux of the matter. When there's no longer, right now, people have this incentive, right? They hold dollars. They hold dollars because everybody else is using dollars. And so if everybody else is using dollars, then they're going to hold dollars. That's how it works. People it's a herd mentality. People are going to do what everybody else is doing. Everybody else is holding dollars, so they're going to hold dollars. And it's this reinforcing cycle that almost forces people into holding dollars. And as long as there's this huge market for people holding dollars, then people are going to continue to hold dollars, and the U.S. government has all this huge population to pawn off its dollars and its debt onto. And when that's no longer the case, when people start taking on more and more and more renminbi and fewer dollars, maybe more euros, more renminbi, fewer dollars, more francs, as the dollar begins to decline, and the data's there. The data shows very clearly what's happening in all these trends. And as it happens, and as it unwinds, and as it unfolds, now there's less of a demand around the world to hold dollars. What does that mean? It means, who else does the U.S. government have to pawn off its debt? Who else does the U.S. government have to pawn off all of its dollars? Not that many people. Certainly a lot fewer foreigners than used to be. So what happens? All those dollars stay at home. They stay at home and they get pawned off on, for example, the Federal Reserve, right? Or the U.S. Social Security Trust Fund, internal groups. And these create huge problems at home because then you get to a place like Chile, right? In the same way, if Chile were to go out and just print and print and print all this money, then who would buy it all? Probably the Chilean central bank. The Chilean central bank would take on all this debt. They would print money. They would end up loaning it all to the Chilean government. They would hold all these bonds. And the balance sheet of the Chilean central bank would grow exponentially. And as it grows exponentially, a massive collapse in the confidence in the currency would ensue. Inflation would set in because all these Chilean pesos would be sitting here in Chile at home. And when you don't have a consequent increase in the amount of stuff that's being produced in an economy, but you have this huge increase in the amount of currency, then it follows logically that the average price level is going to increase dramatically. And that's the sort of stuff that we're going to start seeing in the United States as the U.S. dollar begins to decline. This isn't any kind of theory or conjecture or tinfoil hat stuff. I mean, this is just fact. And this is something that's happened so many times throughout history, going back literally all the way into the history of the world, all the way back to when people actually started using coinage and debasing their currency. And when it's not the first time in history when reserve standards in the world have collapsed. We've seen this happen. The British pound used to be the global reserve standard. The Spanish real de ocho used to be the global reserve standard, and people were using Venetian gold ducats and so forth. All throughout history, there's always been some global reserve standard, and that reserve standard has changed. And whenever it changes, it causes serious problems in the domestic economy for the producer of that former reserve currency, because suddenly there's this huge tidal wave of money coming back because nobody wants to hold their money anymore. And that creates massive inflationary challenges in the domestic economy. This is the stuff that's going to happen in the United States. This is where capital controls come in, and exchange controls, and price controls, and wage controls, and all sorts of these things. Again, we don't have to look very far in history to find out what happens when these events unfold. This is the sort of thing that's in store for the United States. This is happening in front of our very eyes. This isn't some wild conspiracy theory. This isn't something that we think, oh, this might happen 30 years from now. It's happening right now. It's happening right now. I encourage everybody, you can go and find this for yourself. Go and look at this stuff online. Go and look at it in Google. You can look at any major news source that you trust out there, and they will give you the events. They might not necessarily come up with the same analysis, but they tell you, yep, the Chinese, the Russians, the Brazilians, and so forth, they're creating their own trade settlement bank. Yes, the Chinese and the Russians are holding renminbi. Yes, all these different countries now are trading in renminbi and holding renminbi reserves. Yes, these major Fortune 500 companies are issuing renminbi-denominated debt. Yes, the French are seriously pissed off and don't want to deal with the U.S. dollar anymore. Yes, 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 check, check, check. All these things are happening. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out where this is going. And if everybody begins to move to a new standard, what does that mean for the dollar? What does that mean for the U.S. economy? What does that mean for all the debt that the U.S. government has accumulated? And when they no longer have all these willing foreigners who are going to take on all that debt and willingly screw themselves over 2 times in this process. What happens when that scam is finally called and people don't have that ability anymore? There are serious implications for this. And this is something that people really need to understand. Right now in the United States, I just spent a few days there. It's always very interesting to me because when I go to the United States, it is I'm sort of from the outside looking in. I grew up there, sure, so I understand the country very well, but I don't live there anymore. I haven't lived there for 10 years, and so I come and go, and I notice these changes very acutely whenever I come in. I mean, it was interesting for me to be there, to show up after a year plus being away, and all of a sudden show up in 2009. When everything was crashing and everybody was terrified and so forth. And I come every, probably once or twice a year. Maybe a little bit more than that sometimes. And it's very interesting for me because I feel all these changes very acutely. And as I come around the United States, in the last several months, I've been in New York, and I was in LA and Dallas and maybe a couple other places. Was I in Atlanta? I don't remember. And it's interesting to me because the way that my read on it is that for a lot of people, there's no doubt there are tens of millions of people suffering. I mean, it's one of those things. I feel like I want to do a Notes from the Field article. It's like that Jeff Foxworthy bit. You might be a redneck. If the Federal Reserve has maintained 0% interest rates and refuses to raise interest rates by even 0.25%, you might be in a complete economic scam. When there are still tens of millions of people on food stamps, record levels of people on food stamps. I think there's something like 46.4 million people on food stamps, which is up from something like 25, 28 million before the crisis. And supposedly the economy is doing so well. You might be in an economic scam. When the U.S. federal government keeps telling you that everything is all good, and if there's still and when they preface their deficit level by saying we're only $500 billion running a $500 billion deficit, and they manage to rack up $17.7 trillion in debt, you might be in an economic scam. And it's completely delusional, and there are tens of millions of people that are still suffering. They're giving away 30 million free school lunches and school breakfasts a day. School just started. I mean, tens of millions of kids who can't afford school lunches. And there are tens of millions of people that are suffering. It's unbelievable what's happening. There's large swaths of the upper middle class, in particular, that are doing just great. If you're doing, if you've got a professional degree, you've got a master's degree, you probably got a well-paying job, you're making 150 grand a year, you're doing really well. Particularly if you live in a dual-income household, things are going well. And of course, the upper middle class is doing well. Wealthy people are doing great, really great. The prices of all of their assets are going up sky high. When I was in LA, I guess I was just in LA last week, and I was there and I was hanging out with a friend of mine. His name is Van Simmons, and he's one of the most, I think, foremost collectors of just anything really that's collectible. I mean, this guy does rare coins and stamps and art and all kinds of stuff. And he's a dealer of these things and easily one of the foremost authorities in the world on anything that's rare and collectible. And, Van was telling me, I mean, he sees this stuff. I mean, he's such a sound guy. I mean, he understands everything for what it is. And he buys these things and he invests in these collectibles because they're really great inflation hedges. And he was giving me all these signs about, this collectible Winchester rifle that sold for just an unconscionably ridiculously high price. And, this piece of art and that piece of art and how quickly this stuff has gone up in value. And all this stuff, to me, I look at it and go, how's that not just a blaring sign of the top? That the top is in, and when people are paying tens of millions of dollars for something that was going for $100,000 just a few years ago, I mean, it's just an unbelievable sign that things are just spiraling out of control. That there's just another facet of the Roaring '20s, which was actually it was also unfolding in the Weimar Republic. At the time, right before their own hyperinflation hit in the United States, the Depression hit. The world has seen this stuff before. They've seen extraordinarily excessive consumption, with their just ostentatious shows of wealth everywhere. I mean, and this is the society that we're living in now. Wealthy people are doing extraordinarily well. Their stocks keep going up, and of course, they're the ones who own all the stocks. The upper middle class, yeah, you might own 150 shares of Google and 100 shares of Apple. Really wealthy people own tens of thousands of shares, hundreds of thousands of shares of these companies. So, when those stock prices go up, they're doing extremely well. They're making millions, tens of millions of dollars. I remember I've got I won't call him a friend, I'll call him an acquaintance. A guy used to be the CEO of a major Fortune 500 company, and he left a couple of years ago, and he got quite a nice package when he left. And all he does now is he just he trades stocks, and he actually thinks he's a smart guy. He's not a dumb guy, but I mean he thinks he's this great stock picker. Because the value of his portfolio has gone up, and we were joking about it. This was while Bernanke was still the Fed chairman, and I said, "So do you have like a bust of Ben Bernanke on your desk? Do you have a shrine? Do you throw rose petals at the foot of his portrait in your office every day when you come into work? Because this is the only reason why all of your portfolio has gone up. This is what happens when central bankers conjure trillions of, when they make $1 trillion a year." in new money, and that's obviously that money ends up in financial markets. And when you own a substantial amount of financial markets, when you own a lot of shares, and you're going to end up making a lot of money, and wealthy people are making not even millions, making tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. The upper middle class are making thousands, maybe tens of thousands, and everybody else is just paying higher prices for all the normal stuff that they buy. University tuition and insurance and food and fuel and all that stuff, everybody else just has to suffer higher prices. But overall, I think that the delusion is that everything kind of seems fine. Everything seems okay. When people think about economic turmoil today, nobody thinks about the United States. Nobody thinks about the United States. If we think about economic turmoil, people think about now, they're looking back at Portugal, saying, oh, the periphery of the Eurozone's in trouble. Nobody thinks about the United States. Everybody says, oh, the U.S. is doing great. Another friend of mine in L.A., told me, I was visiting him as well, and he went to he's a pretty highfalutin guy in the record business, in the music business, and he told me he went to a breakfast, one of these breakfasts with Barack Obama, and it was just a handful of people there. It was like a lot of celebrities and stuff like that. And this is when Obama can kind of, keep it real, right? So he doesn't have to be Mr. Politician standing up there, just saying a bunch of BS for the cameras. Like, he can kind of be a real guy. And so my buddy was asking him, some questions, and he says, well, what do you think about Putin? And apparently, well, actually, I don't know if I should be saying this or not. I should clear it with him. Bottom line is, the guy seems completely and totally out of touch. And one of the things, I guess, that he was saying was that his opinion, Obama's own opinion of the economy, is that it's doing just great, and every single indicator says that the economy is way better under Obama than it's been under all these other presidents, and that he's done such a great job. And this is what he honestly believes. He thinks that he has turned the economy around and everything's doing really great. And it just seems, again, really out of touch with tens of millions of people that are suffering, and the absurd amount of economic favor that's gone into the pockets of the wealthy at the expense of everyone else. That said, I think a lot of people really believe it. I think because so much of the pain has kind of stopped and things have settled down, and certainly there have been a lot of jobs that have been created and exports are coming back online. All that's really great news, and I think there's certainly some things to be excited about in the United States. Some really interesting developments in energy and so forth. I don't see it being the revolution that a lot of people do. I mean, for all this. All the natural gas exports that they're looking to make. I mean, the numbers just don't stack up. If you look at what happened with the rise of the internet in the 1990s, they would almost essentially have to tap all of the natural gas reserves in the United States in order to come close to that kind of economic lift. But there are definitely several things to be excited about in the United States. We can talk about that another time. Again, I'm a very data-driven person and want to be completely objective about things. I think there are far more problems in the United States, particularly from a macro perspective. Again, if you look at the debt, you look at the deficits, you look at all the real numbers that show that they've basically squandered all of their tax revenue before they even get started paying anything that we recognize as government. When they blow through almost all the tax revenue before there's a single check written for the military, for Obama's jet, for the national parks and the FBI and Homeland Security and all those things, when they've almost blown through their entire tax revenue, this is a major problem. It's a major problem. There's no politician. I mean, the election cycle is about to get started again. Whoa, what a headache this is going to be for the next couple of years. And people are going to go out and they're going to get their hopes up. Some politician, some candidate's going to tell them it's all good and I'm going to fix everything, and people are going to believe it. People are going to believe it, but there's no candidate out there who's saying, "Hey, we're going to default on the debt and we're going to cut Social Security." I mean, nobody's going to say that, but that's the only possible way that this situation gets fixed, is if they actually default. They default on their debt. They have to default on the Fed. Oh, that's going to create a currency crisis. They have to default on retirees and screw another 10 million, 30 million, 50 million people over the next several years. I mean, nobody's going to actually say that. And nobody really wants to do it because that's political suicide. Nobody wants to go down as the guy who defaulted on debt in the United States. It's just not going to happen. And so it's just going to be the same charade over and over again. But people believe them, just in the same way that people believe everything's fine. The government says that the crisis is over, and so people believe that the crisis is over. upper middle class are doing pretty okay. Wealthy people are doing extremely well. The ultra wealthy are doing just ridiculously well. And to me, that sort of sense of calm is probably the best time to actually act. I mean, who wants to wait to do something about it until it's all too late, until it all comes crashing down? I think people really fundamentally deep down understand what's happening. They feel, this is one of the things I keep saying, because this is when I'm there, when I'm in the United States, I feel this. I feel this deep in my core. My instinct says, this is not the country that I grew up in. It doesn't feel anything like the country I grew up in. And yeah, great. Things change. No problem. I'm down with that. But ideally things change for the better, and it's not. It's not better. It's definitely not better. And I sit with my mother, my mother's an immigrant. She came off the boat, or off the airplane, as it were. And, for her, she came in that generation of immigrants in the 1970s, a really fantastic generation that, they came in and assimilated and worked hard and saved and really wanted to produce and live the American dream and so forth. And it's so sad to me to watch her as she breaks down in tears when she starts talking about, what's happened to the country. It's not the country that she came to. It's not the America that my mother came to, 40 years ago in the 1970s. I think that is really indicative of so much, and I think a lot of people feel the same thing. And it's in our instincts, really. And I talk about this. I go to Africa every year. I love being in Africa. Africa is so different, just like countries in Europe are so different, and countries in South America and Asia are so different. Africa is just such a unique place to be, and I try and go every year. And I see stuff out there all the time. I love watching nature in Africa and going out into nature and watching animals in the wild. And I see this over and over and over again, some big watering hole in the middle of nowhere, in the Okavango Delta, and animals just there, and they're sipping, water from the brook and from the pond. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a stillness. And suddenly, all the animals just split. They just start sprinting, running for their lives, top speed as fast as they can. Something in their instinct told them that there's danger. And they listen to those instincts. And there are obviously several animals that didn't. They didn't listen to their instincts, and they just sat there and they kept sipping water. And they got ripped to shreds by this huge pride of lions that came out of nowhere looking for some lunch. And those animals that listened to their instinct lived and survived another day. And those that didn't became lunch. And I don't think that we're really that different human beings. I think that we have instincts, and our instincts tell us things. And what happens is our brains get in the way. We have this higher level of thinking, and we think that this is what separates man from beast, is that our ability to reason and so forth. And we're right. It is a huge separation. Our reason, our opposable thumbs, all those great things for human beings. But in many cases, our brains actually do get in the way. Our reason gets in the way. Our instincts are telling us that something is wrong. And then what do? We turn on the television and we listen to the government, and we listen to talking heads say that, it's such a great time to invest in the stock market, regardless of the fact that it's all-time high and every possible metric suggests that it's absurdly overvalued. And the government tells us that everything is great and that inflation is low and that it doesn't matter if interest rates are zero. The government will admit to you that you're going to get 0.01% in a bank account, and you're going to get, and the official rate of inflation is 2.1%. You are guaranteed to lose money if you hold money in the bank. They are screwing every single person in the world who is a saver. Anybody who is responsible and saves money, they are screwing. And we know this. Our instincts tell us that when we look at our bank statement, we see, wait a minute, I got 4 cents of interest this quarter? What? Could this possibly be real? Yes, it is real. And we know this is wrong. We know on our instincts that there's something seriously wrong with this system. All we have to do is think back to what it was like, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We know that it's different now, and we don't like the way that it's different. Yeah, we've got iPads. We've got, Netflix on demand. We've got all these nice things. But is it really actually better? And I think that our instincts are telling us that something is wrong. Our brains get in the way, and it's like Soma. If you've ever read Brave New World, it's like Soma, and our brains get in the way, and they say, "Oh no, it's fine," and the brains sort of squash all those instincts. Our instincts are crying out that something's wrong. And our brains say, don't worry about it, it's going to be fine. Because human beings want to believe we're optimistic creatures, and it's great to be optimistic. I'm incredibly optimistic, but it's important to be optimistic with a sobering view, a realistic view of the facts. And you can be optimistic once you understand what's happening. It's important to be optimistic because I think that's really when real optimism sets in. The fake optimism is when people go, yeah, something's wrong, I feel my instincts, but my government tells me to not worry. Because people just trust in their government. What have they ever done right? What have they ever done right? What have they ever done good for you? They try to do good things, right? They say, oh, well, we want to give everybody health care. And that's a noble cause. Sure, I can get on board with the intention of saying, well, we want to help everybody with their health care. Okay, that's a nice idea. That's a very nice idea. But they screw it up. They screw everything up. Everything they try to do, they screw up. They say, oh, we want to bail out the banks. I mean, it was a nice idea, right? They want to create stability in the financial system. Okay, fine. The intention was good. But what happened? They screwed it up. They screw up everything that they try to do. They've royally screwed up the education of our children. Everything they try and do, the safety of our food. I mean, what are these food-like substances that people put in their bodies now? And they say, oh, partially hydrogenated soybean oil and high fructose corn syrup and all this stuff. Oh, it's all good. It's all fine. It's perfectly healthy for you because the corn lobby says so. They screw everything up. And yet somehow we continue to be deluded with this false sense of confidence. They say, well, they say it's going to be fine, so it's going to be fine. And we just kind of check out. We just mentally check out. And this is a really dangerous thing. The important thing, and the real optimism comes by understanding these guys don't have a clue. They are so out of touch, they just don't get it. They don't get it. And everything they do is going to only make things worse. That's exactly what they're doing. They're pushing the Russians and the Chinese in bed with each other. They're pushing the rest of the world out of the U.S. banking system. They're begging the world, please stop using the dollar. We're so arrogant and we're going to abuse this power. Please take this power away from us. They're practically begging the rest of the world to do this. They're just egging this on. They're accelerating the decline. They're going to screw it up. They're going to continue to screw this up. And believing that these guys are going to get it sorted out is incredibly dangerous. The real optimism comes when you realize that they can't fix it. And that's not a defeatist attitude. It's a realistic attitude. But who can fix it? You can fix it. You can fix it. You can't fix it for everybody. You can't fix it for you can't fix the country. I can't fix the country. Nobody can fix the country. Nobody can fix the country. I mean, everybody always thinks it's just a question of getting there. We just got to get the right guy in office. The right guy isn't going to be able to get it done. There's too much. I mean, there's just way too many obstacles in the system. There's too many special interests. There's too many lobbyist groups. It's just not going to get done. People try and they try and they try. I mean, again, well-intentioned, great, that's fine. I mean, these destructive paths are always paved in good intentions. It's just not going to happen. And I think the sooner people realize that, the better. And then what they'll realize is that you can fix it. You can fix yourself. You can make it so that none of these consequences don't have to befall you at all. You don't have to be a victim to somebody else's stupidity. You are fully capable and can achieve anything that you want to do, that you set your mind to. All you have to do is have a very clear understanding of reality and the will to actually do something. You don't have to have a lot of money. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to be any of these things. You just have to have a basic common sense understanding. Just turn off, the talking head influences and turn on that instinct inside of you that says something is wrong. Take a big picture of you. Look around. Take a big picture of you and see for yourself, does this really look like the country you grew up in? Is this going in the right direction? And is there really anything out there that's going to arrest that decline and start moving things in the right direction? Where's the debt level going? Where are the deficits going? Where's the monetary policy going? How much money are they continuing to print? What's happening? I mean, what is the trend with the police state in the United States? I mean, again, just take an honest appraisal of the big picture, and you'll understand where this is going. And you realize that there's so many things that you personally can do. If you know that your banking system is completely screwed, then why would you hold all of your life savings in it? If you know that things are probably going to, bad things, may continue to happen in the place where you live, and this isn't just, for the United States. We're talking about the petrodollar here, but obviously there are a lot of implications for Western Europe, and I mean, it's all over the world. It doesn't matter where you live. If you feel these things in your instinct, it's the exact same reality. And if you're looking at this, I mean, if you're in Europe and you look around, you see your banking systems are crumbling and that the banks are starting to restrict cash withdrawals and all these things. Why would you hold your money there? Why would you hold your money in an insolvent banking system? Why would you put all of your assets and all of your interest and all of your livelihood in one country that's basically going bankrupt? Why would anybody do that? And what you realize is, this is 2014. It's almost 2015. I mean, long gone are the days when if somebody wanted to move some cash, they had to put it on a stagecoach, and move it across the country and taking all these. I mean, you can sit in your underwear in your living room and open up a bank account in Singapore, which, by the way, has never had a banking failure ever. And the banks in that banking system are incredibly well capitalized, supported by depository insurance, supported by a government that has zero net debt. I mean, it's a night and day difference. Why wouldn't somebody do that? You can do that and have at almost no cost whatsoever. There's no downside in having a little bit of cash tucked away in a system where you can actually feel safe about where your money is held. And there's so many. I mean, you look at. There's just so many different options. Again, when you have all of your assets and all of your interests and all of your livelihood, where you bank, where you invest, where you have your business structured, where you hire your employees, where your email account is located. I mean, if all the objective evidence says that they're spying on your email, because you use one of the major email providers, and the major email providers are just handing over all of your email, why would you do that? Why would you continue to hold your email in one of those places? Literally, there's zero cost to switching to another email provider. There's so many free email providers out there that you can use that are overseas, or you can encrypted solutions and so forth. But why would anybody continue to do that? That's not a trend that's improving. There's so many different options out there. That's essentially, shifting to a plan B, or I like to say, putting on your seatbelt. These are important things that I think people need to understand, people need to recognize. And once you recognize that there actually are solutions, these are individual solutions. The power is with the individual, not with the state, not with the government, not with the people, in quotes, and the entire country. The power is with the individual. That's where this is ultimately going. And once you realize that you actually have the power, that you have solutions, you have options, there's a tremendous amount to be optimistic about. Because if you have a very clear understanding of what's happening, there's so many opportunities out there. And I like to remind people that, just even in our own recent history in the world, some of the wealthiest people in the world were actually created out of the hyperinflation that came out of the Weimar Republic. One of the worst episodes of hyperinflation in history. And yet some of the wealthiest people in the world came out of that because they had the foresight to understand what was going on before it happened. Everybody else, they ignored all the warning signs, and everybody who was a worker, who was a pensioner, who was a saver, they all got screwed. And people who understood the writing on the wall, they saw it coming, and they said, I'm going to do something about this. And they were chastised by their friends. They said, why are you doing that? Why would you go and get this foreign currency? Why would you move some assets abroad? And they were chastised by their friends because at the time, everything was fine. It was the roaring 20s. It was all good. And then all of a sudden, the collapse came. Hyperinflation set in. And suddenly, these guys who did the right thing became incredibly wealthy practically overnight. There's a tremendous amount of reason to be optimistic right now, as long as you have the intellectual courage to take an objective look at what's really happening and the will to act. I appreciate you listening to this. This one was particularly exciting for me. It's a topic very near and dear to my heart. We're going to go ahead and cut it off. Boy, we've been at this almost an hour, so I appreciate your time and attention, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.